A medieval astrolabe holds more secrets than its star charts reveal. We are resurrecting 26 lost crafts, from astrolabe workshops to glasshouse secrets, and rebuilding them step by step for the modern maker. By the end of this journey, you will possess the practical knowledge to bring these forgotten arts into your own hands. Why did crafts capable of mapping the heavens and forging legendary blades simply vanish from memory? What profound lessons in patience and ingenuity are hidden within their exacting processes? This is a reclamation of the human spirit of creation itself. How much of our own creative potential is waiting to be unlocked by the hands of the past? That unique fingerprint of the maker, left on everything from a humble spoon to a celestial instrument, is a world we have almost entirely lost. The disappearance of these 26 crafts is far more than a simple upgrade in efficiency. It is a profound rupture in the chain of human knowledge, a severing of our direct, tactile conversation with the world. To rebuild them is to become a cultural archaeologist, piecing together not just objects, but the very thoughts and problem-solving processes of our ancestors. Historian Dr. Elena Vance suggests that to make something as our forebears did is to think as they thought, to solve problems with the same limited tools. This is not mere nostalgia. It is an active rebellion against our disposable culture, offering vital lessons in sustainability and mindful resourcefulness. When you dedicate weeks to a single object, you develop a relationship with the material that a factory-made item can never provide. You learn to see the potential in a piece of wood, the character in a lump of clay, the hidden map of the stars within a disc of brass. This journey of revival is not about perfectly replicating museum pieces. It is about reclaiming a slower, more intentional pace of life and rediscovering the deep satisfaction of creating something with your own hands, guided by the wisdom of the past. With this understanding as our foundation, we are ready to begin our first practical reconstruction. A disc of brass no larger than your hand becomes a map of the cosmos. The astrolabe was indeed the medieval smartphone, a pocket-sized universe of brass and calculation. Its reconstruction begins not with code, but with the physical act of creation, starting with the mater. This mother disk is the foundation, the stable earth upon which the heavens will turn. You begin with a sheet of brass, carefully cutting a perfect circle. The edges must be filed until they are smooth and flawless, a process that teaches you the first lesson of medieval craftsmanship, the absolute necessity of a solid foundation. Every subsequent layer of complexity depends on this initial precision. Once the mater is prepared, you inscribe it with the coordinate lines of the celestial sphere. This is not mere decoration. Each etched circle represents a line of altitude or azimuth, a geometric grid for the sky itself. The engraver's tool, called a graver, must be guided with a combination of firm pressure and delicate control. A single slip of the hand can render the entire disc useless, a stark reminder of the high stakes of pre-industrial craftsmanship. This is where the maker's mind merges with the mind of the medieval astronomer, thinking in arcs and angles, translating abstract celestial mechanics into tangible, permanent lines on metal. Then comes the most breathtaking component, the retere. This is the star map, a web of brass so finely cut it looks like metallic lace. It represents the fixed stars and the ecliptic path of the sun, a rotating model of the firmament. Historically, crafting this was the work of a master jeweler, requiring countless hours with a fret saw and files. For the modern maker, this is a perfect moment to blend eras. You can design the intricate patterns using computer software, then have them laser cut from a thin sheet of brass. This fusion of digital design and ancient purpose captures the very spirit of this revival, using the best of our time to honor the genius of the past. The final act is one of elegant simplicity, assembling the pieces. The engraved mater, the pierced retere, and a pointer called the alidade are stacked on a central pin. A small wedge, known as a horse, secures the assembly while allowing the retere to spin freely. When you lift the completed instrument and sight a star through the alidade, you are performing an act that connects you across a millennium. You are not just holding a tool, you are holding a working theory of the universe, a physical manifestation of human curiosity and ingenuity. The meticulous skill of shaping and joining metal, so vital to the astrolabe, finds a parallel in another transformative craft, one that also began with raw earth and ended with objects of clarity and light. From the precise geometry of the astrolabe, we enter the smoky, heat-hazed world of the medieval smithy. Here, the clang of hammer on anvil did not just shape metal, it created legend. This is the art of pattern welded steel, the method behind those mythical Viking blades often misnamed Damascus steel. It was not a single metal but a composite, a marriage of different irons painstakingly forged, welded to produce a weapon of unparalleled strength and flexibility, its surface alive with watery, hypnotic patterns. The journey of such a blade begins with a deliberate choice of materials. You select a piece of high-carbon steel for its ability to hold a razor-sharp edge, and you pair it with softer, low-carbon wrought iron, which gives the blade its crucial toughness and ability to absorb impact without breaking. These metals are cut into strips, stacked into a layered block, and placed into the heart of a charcoal forge. The fire must be worked until the stack glows a brilliant, incandescent yellow, the color of a summer sun. This is welding heat, a state where the metals are on the very cusp of melting, ready to become one. Then comes the moment of truth. The smith lifts the glowing billet and brings the hammer down. The force must be perfect, a precise blow that fuses the layers into a solid mass without trapping slag or air, flaws that would cause the steel to shatter under stress. It is a test of nerve, timing, and an intimate understanding of the material's behavior. Once this initial weld is secure, the true labor begins. The billet is drawn out, folded back upon itself, and welded again. This process is repeated over and over, sometimes dozens of times. With each fold, the layers multiply, creating a microscopic laminate that could number in the hundreds. This intricate internal structure is what gives the blade its legendary property, a hard edge married to a flexible spine. After the rough shape is forged, the blade is ground and polished to a smooth, gray finish. Yet it still appears as a uniform piece of metal. The final act is one of revelation. The smith applies a mild acid, often vinegar or fermented rye bread, to the polished surface. The acid etches the metal, but it bites into the different alloys at varying rates. The high-carbon steel resists more, while the low-carbon iron is eaten away more deeply. As the surface is cleaned, the hidden landscape within is unveiled, a swirling, flowing pattern that tells the story of every fold and every fire. This mastery of fire and metal, of transforming raw earth into a tool of both beauty and function, finds a profound parallel in the transformative power of another elemental force, one that works not with fire but with earth and extreme heat. That same transformative heat, channeled not to harden steel but to transmute earth into light, defines our next craft. Within the glasshouse, sand and potash surrender to the furnace, emerging as sheets of brilliant, colored glass. This is the alchemy of stained glass, a process of painting with light itself. For the modern maker, the journey often begins not at the blazing glory hole of a glassblower, but with a full-scale drawing known as a cartoon. This is the architectural blueprint for your luminous vision, a detailed map of every lead line and color field. With the cartoon laid out, you select your sheets of glass, each hue achieved by adding metallic oxides to the molten mix, cobalt for deep blue, gold for ruby red. The cutting begins, a tense process of scoring the glass surface with a steel wheel cutter, then applying precise pressure to snap it along the line. The sound of a clean break is a small victory, the first step in giving physical form to your design. But flat color is only the beginning. The true soul of a character, the fold of a robe, the expression on a face, these details are painted onto the glass. The paint itself is a medieval concoction of iron oxide and finely ground glass. You apply it with brushes, building up shadows and lines, knowing that your work right now looks dark and muddy. The magic happens in the kiln. As the glass is fired, the paint fuses permanently into its surface, becoming one with the material, a metamorphosis from applied pigment to an inherent part of the glass. Then comes the assembly, a slow, meditative puzzle. Each piece of glass is fitted into H-shaped lead cames, the flexible skeleton that will hold the entire window together. Every intersection of lead is carefully soldered, creating a web of metal that is both strong and forgiving. The final act is to force a sticky cement under the edges of the lead, sealing the glass in place and making the entire panel weatherproof and rigid. When you finally lift your completed panel towards the sun, the dark paint and the lead lines fall away and the glass ignites. It is no longer a collection of parts, but a single story told in radiance, a cascade of colored light that has not changed since the great cathedrals were built. This intricate assembly of fragile pieces into a lasting, luminous whole finds a fascinating echo in another structured craft, one that uses pliable fibers instead of brittle glass to create objects of both strength and beauty. The quiet of the scriptorium offers a different kind of alchemy. Here, light is captured not in colored glass, but in liquid gold and precious pigments, preserved on the intimate surface of a page. This is the scribe's sacred duty, the craft of the illuminated manuscript, where words themselves became treasures. Your journey into this world begins with the foundation, the very skin of the book. Parchment and vellum, made from the stretched and scraped hides of animals, provide a uniquely durable and receptive surface. For the modern maker, sourcing professionally prepared parchment is a perfect start, though high-quality, heavy paper can beautifully mimic its texture and tooth. Before a single drop of ink is spilled, the page must be prepared with a faint grid, ruled in with a lead point or fine pencil. This invisible architecture ensures every line of text will march in perfect, disciplined rows, a silent testament to the medieval love of order and harmony. Then the quill comes to life. A goose or swan feather, carefully cut and shaped, becomes an extension of your hand. You dip it into iron gall ink, a brew of oak galls and iron salts that flows a pale gray but matures on the page to a deep, enduring brown-black. Each stroke demands your full attention. The angle of the nib, the pressure of your hand, the flow of the ink, all must be in perfect concert. A single misplaced letter, a blot, could mean days of work lost, forcing you to carefully scrape the parchment clean and begin again. This is writing as a physical, mindful act, a world away from the tap of a keyboard, but the true glory of the page lies in its illumination. This is where the scribe steps aside and the painter takes over. You must first prepare your colors, grinding precious stones into fine powders. Lapis lazuli yields a celestial blue, vermilion a fiery red, and malachite a deep, verdant green. These powders are mixed with the yolk of an egg to create tempera paint, a medium that dries quickly and with a brilliant, luminous quality. Then comes the most breathtaking step, the application of gold leaf. A sticky, plaster-like base called gesso is laid down in the desired pattern, perhaps for a grand initial letter. Once the gesso is perfectly tacky, you lay a sheet of impossibly thin gold leaf upon it. With a gentle breath, the excess gold blows away, leaving behind a solid, radiant surface that seems to emit its own divine light. The completed page is more than text. It is a portable object of immense value and beauty, a fusion of calligraphy, painting, and metallurgy that represents countless hours of focused devotion. This intimate, small-scale mastery of materials prepares us for a craft that works on a monumental scale, shaping not pages, but the very walls and windows of a city. The massive timber frame, a three-dimensional puzzle of interlocking strength, finds its echo in a far more delicate wooden art. Within the quiet of a different workshop, the same understanding of grain and structure is applied to a far more intricate scale. This is the world of the woodcarver, where blocks of lime or oak are coaxed into scenes of breathtaking depth and realism. The journey begins not with a chisel, but with a detailed drawing transferred onto the smooth, prepared face of the wood. This is your map guiding every subsequent cut. The first step is roughing out, using gouges of various sweeps to remove large areas of waste wood and establish the basic, blocky forms of the design. It is a brutal yet delicate process, for cutting too deep here can ruin the entire piece before the real work even begins. Then comes the slow, patient work of modeling. You exchange the heavy gouges for finer tools, defining the folds of a garment, the curl of a leaf, the subtle curve of a cheek. The carver must think like a sculptor, constantly rotating the work, seeing the emerging figure from every angle, understanding how the light will eventually fall across the finished surfaces. This is where the wood itself becomes a partner. You must work with the direction of the grain, not against it, to achieve smooth, clean cuts. A cut made against the grain will tear and splinter, leaving a ragged wound in the material. The final stage is the finishing, a transformation through abrasion. A sequence of progressively finer sandpapers, or in the medieval context, crushed reeds and polishing stones, is used to erase all trace of the tool marks. The surface becomes as smooth as silk, ready to receive color or simply a protective coat of oil. When that oil soaks in, the grain of the wood blooms to life and the carved figures seem to breathe. The same hand that hewed a mighty beam with a broadaxe now guides a tiny veined chisel to create the delicate veins on a carved leaf, proving that mastery over a material means understanding its soul from the grandest scale down to the most minute. This intimate conversation with organic material, reading its story in the grain, prepares us for a craft that works with an even more unpredictable medium, one that grows and lives. The quiet focus of the carver gives way to a different woodland rhythm, the steady, percussive push and pull of the Bodger at his pole lathe. Deep in the forest, this itinerant craftsman represented a pinnacle of efficiency, transforming a freshly cut log into elegant chair legs and spindles with nothing but simple tools and his own physical momentum. To rebuild his craft is to learn a dance with wood and machine, a cycle of power and pause that modern tools have all but erased. Your first task is to construct the lathe itself, a deceptively simple machine born from the forest around you. A sturdy wooden frame holds two critical points, the pike and the poppet. These are the centers between which your piece of wood, known as the workpiece, will spin. Above the lathe, you fasten a long, flexible sapling, the pole that gives the tool its name. A cord wraps around the workpiece and connects down to a foot treadle. The entire system is a beautiful loop of stored and released energy. When you push down on the treadle with your foot, the cord pulls down, spinning the wood towards you. This is the moment of the cut, the brief window where you present your chisel to the spinning surface. Then you release the treadle. The spring of the pole overhead pulls the cord back up, reversing the spin and returning the treadle to your foot for the next push. This is not the continuous, whirring spin of an electric motor. It is a rhythm, a breath, cut on the downstroke, reposition on the upstroke. The technique demands a different kind of patience and control. You cannot force the tool. You must work with the rhythm of the machine, letting the wood reveal its form in a series of fleeting, rhythmic encounters. The Bodger almost always worked with green wood, freshly cut and still full of moisture. For the modern maker, this is a revelation. Green wood is softer and far easier to cut with the limited power of the pole lathe, and it was the Bodger's material of choice, allowing for incredible speed and efficiency right at the source of the timber. As you work, the shavings fly and a form emerges from the rough log, a rounded leg or a delicate spindle. The finished piece, often turned to its final shape while green, will warp and twist as it dries, gaining a unique, organic character. These objects were rarely sanded smooth. They proudly bear the tiny ripples and tool marks of their creation, the direct transcription of the Bodger's dance from forest to functional form. This intimate, rhythmic creation from a single log, a self-contained cycle of energy, stands in stark contrast to a craft that assembles complexity from many disparate parts, weaving strength from countless individual strands. That intricate dance of moving parts within a lock finds its opposite in a craft of absolute stillness. Before the age of photography, if you wished to preserve a face, you did so not with light, but with metal and force. This is the art of the Pewter, a craft of capturing form in a low melting point alloy of tin, copper, and antimony. The Pewterer's work begins not with a hammer, but with a block of fine-grained stone, often gypsum or limestone. Into this stone you carve a negative image, a deep, detailed cavity that is the mirror of your desired object. This is the mold, and its creation is an act of sculpture in reverse, demanding you think about space and volume in a completely inverted way. Once the mold is meticulously carved and smoothed, it is preheated. The pewter itself is melted in a small crucible over a gentle fire, its surface shimmering like liquid mercury. Then comes the moment of transformation. You pour the molten metal into the stone mold in a single, steady stream. There is a brief hiss as the hot liquid fills every crevice of the carved cavity, and then you wait. The metal does not take long to cool and solidify. When you separate the two halves of the mold, the object within is born, a perfect, solid positive of the negative space you created. For a simple badge or medallion, the work might be nearly done, but for more complex items like spoons or flasks, the cast piece, known as the blank, is just the beginning. You must then cut off the excess metal from the pouring channel, the sprue, and file the piece smooth. The final polishing is where the true magic happens. Using increasingly fine abrasives, you rub the pewter until it gleams with a soft, silvery sheen. This is not the brilliant flash of silver, but a warmer, deeper luminescence, a glow that seems to come from within the metal itself. To hold a newly cast pewter spoon is to hold a moment frozen in time, the precise instant the liquid metal surrendered its fluidity to become a permanent, useful thing. This act of capturing a moment in a solid object, of giving fleeting form a kind of immortality, connects us to a craft that works with an even more transient medium, one that is spun from air and intention. The glow of a newly polished pewter spoon connects you to the medieval table more intimately than any history book ever could. While nobles displayed their wealth with silver and gold, the common household relied on this humble alloy of tin, copper, and antimony for plates, cups, and spoons. Casting your own pewter vessel is a form of domestic alchemy, transforming raw metal into an object for daily use. Your journey begins with the mold, the negative space that will define your creation. Historically, molds were crafted from durable bronze or brass, but for the modern maker, a block of cuttlefish bone offers a wonderfully traditional and accessible alternative. Its soft, chalky texture is perfect for carving. You take a knife and carefully excavate the impression of your design, perhaps a simple spoon, into one half of the bone. This act of reverse sculpting demands you think in voids and cavities, imagining the solid object that will eventually fill that empty space. The two halves of the mold are then bound together, leaving a small channel open at the top for the pour. Next, you prepare the metal. Pewter's low melting point, needing only the heat of a kitchen stove, is what makes this craft so inviting. You place small ingots into a steel crucible, watching them soften, shimmer, and finally collapse into a puddle of liquid silver. The moment of truth is the pour. You must tip the crucible with a steady hand, guiding a single, continuous stream of molten metal into the waiting mold. There is a brief, satisfying hiss as the cavity fills, a sound of potential being captured. Then you wait. The wait is not long, just a few minutes for the metal to surrender its heat and solidify. Opening the mold always carries a thrill of discovery. Inside lies your casting, a rough, metallic twin of the space you carved, still attached to a thin tail of excess metal called the sprue. You saw this sprue away, then begin the transformative process of filing and sanding. The rough casting slowly gives way to a smooth, recognizable form. Finally, you polish it with increasingly fine abrasives until the surface gleams with that distinct, soft, silvery luster. To hold your own pewter spoon is to feel the weight of countless ordinary meals from centuries past. This process of creating from a liquid state, of giving form to a molten material, shares its fundamental principle with a craft that works with an even more temperamental and fragile liquid medium. The furnace roars, a contained star whose heart holds sand transformed into a glowing, honey-thick liquid. To gather glass is your first act of faith, plunging the tip of a 5-foot iron blowpipe into this molten pool. You rotate the pipe, winding the viscous glass onto its end like fiery taffy, pulling out a glowing orange gather the size of a large apple. This is your potential, a droplet of captured sunlight. The next step is a grounding ritual, rolling the glowing gather across a flat steel slab called a marver. The hissing contact chills the outer skin, creating a leathery surface you can work against, a crucial contrast to the liquid fire within. Then comes the breath. You place your lips to the end of the pipe and blow, not a mighty gust but a steady, gentle pressure. A bubble begins to form deep within the molten core, a pocket of your own breath trapped in glass. This bubble is your canvas. Now gravity becomes your primary tool. You swing the pipe gently, letting the weighted glass elongate. You roll it constantly to keep the form symmetrical. The heat is relentless, and the glass is always moving, always sinking, always seeking to return to a formless blob. Your simple tools, the jacks which look like large metal tweezers and the wooden paddles, are not for brute force. They are guides used to collar a neck, flatten a base, or shape a curve, all while the pipe is in constant, rhythmic motion. This is the dance, a continuous negotiation between your intention, the force of gravity, and the fleeting plasticity of the material. To add decoration, you can roll the still hot vessel in chips of colored glass, which melt into the surface like fiery jewels. Once the body is shaped, you face the delicate transfer. A solid steel rod called a punty is tipped with a small bit of hot glass and welded to the bottom of your vessel. With a sharp tap, the blowpipe is cracked free, leaving your creation now held by the punty, its mouth open. This is your final act of forming, using tools to flare, shape, and perfect the rim that was once the point of your breath. Another tap releases the vessel from the punty, but the work is not done. If this newborn bottle or goblet were allowed to cool in the open air, the temperature shock would lock in invisible stresses, causing it to explode into 1,000 pieces hours or days later. So it travels to its final cradle, the annealing oven. Here, over the course of many hours, sometimes an entire day, the temperature is lowered with infinite slowness, allowing the glass molecules to relax into a stable, peaceful structure. When you finally retrieve it, cool to the touch, you hold more than a vessel. You hold a captured moment, a physical record of your breath, your movements, and your fight against gravity. The skill of controlling a molten material finds a curious echo in a craft that seems its absolute opposite, working with cold, hard, unyielding stone. High on the cathedral walls, where only the birds could see clearly, the medieval mason's imagination ran wild in stone. Grotesques and gargoyles were far more than decoration. They were a silent language of belief, humor, and fear carved in limestone and sandstone. Your journey to carve one begins not with a mallet, but with a drawing, a two-dimensional design that must live fully in three. You must envision your leering face or crouching beast from every angle before a single chip of stone flies. Selecting the right block is your first critical decision. You must read the stone like a map, identifying its natural bedding planes. Carving against this grain risks a catastrophic split, shearing away a demon's horn or a snarling lip you spent days perfecting. Once the block is chosen and your design is chalked onto its faces, the real work begins with the point chisel and a heavy mallet. This is the stage of blocking out, a brutal and liberating process of removing everything that is not your creature. Large chunks of stone fall away with each ringing blow, the form emerging from the raw block like a figure from a fog. There is no going back from a misplaced strike here. Every swing is a permanent commitment. As the general shape solidifies, you exchange the point for finer tools. The claw chisel, with its comb-like teeth, refines the rough surfaces and begins to model the larger forms, the curve of a brow, the bulge of an eye. Then come the flats and rounds, chisels that carve the final details, the deep lines of a scowl, the intricate folds of a wing. For the modern maker, beginning with a softer stone like soapstone offers a forgiving introduction to this subtractive art. It teaches the same fundamental discipline that you are not building up but carving down, revealing a form that already waits imprisoned within the stone. You can choose to leave the surface alive with the chatter marks of your tools, a testament to the hand-made process, or you can polish it to a smooth finish, making the stone feel almost like skin. To stand back and look at your finished grotesque is to understand the medieval mind in a uniquely visceral way. You have given physical form to an abstract thought, a fantasy, a prayer, or a warning, setting it high above the world to watch the centuries pass. These silent stone sentinels looked down upon a town square where life was governed by the steady, relentless march of hours and seasons, a rhythm measured by our next intricate reconstruction. The steady rhythm of a mechanical clock was the heartbeat of a new Europe, a sound entirely separate from the cycles of sun and rain. To build one is to reconstruct the very origins of automated intelligence, capturing the relentless flow of time in a cage of brass and iron. Your journey begins with the frame, a stout wooden structure that must be absolutely rigid, for any flex or warp will spell doom for the delicate dance of its gears. This is the clock's skeleton, and its stability is everything. Then you turn to the heart of the machine, the part that gives it its voice, the verge and foliate escapement. This ingenious device is what transforms a simple, unwinding force into a measured, countable beat. You start by crafting the escape wheel, a crown-like gear with teeth shaped like shark fins. This wheel is connected to the power source, a heavy weight suspended by a cord wrapped around a drum. As the weight falls, it wants to spin the escape wheel freely, to let all the energy out in a single, useless burst. But the escapement stops this. A vertical rod, the verge, has two small, angled pallets that catch the teeth of the escape wheel. As a tooth pushes against one pallet, it swings the verge, which in turn swings a horizontal bar, the foliate, with weights on its ends. This swing brings the second pallet into the path of the next tooth, stopping the wheel again. The momentum of the swinging foliate then reverses the process, creating the iconic tick-tock rhythm. The weights on the foliate are your tuning mechanism. Sliding them in or out changes the speed of the swing, and thus the tempo of your clock, but the escapement alone is not enough. Between the falling weight and the escape wheel lies the gear train, a series of precisely cut wheels and pinions. Each gear must be hand-filed from a disc of metal, its teeth shaped to mesh perfectly with its neighbor. These are not just for show, they act as a Chinese letter, translating the raw, fast power of the falling weight into the slow, majestic turn of the clock's hands. A single great wheel might take an entire day to turn, a direct result of this intricate gear reduction. The moment you set the weight in motion and hear that first clear tick followed by its answering tock is pure magic. You are not just hearing a sound, you are hearing order being imposed on chaos, the birth of a new mechanical pulse for human civilization. This intricate world of metal and predictable motion stands in absolute contrast to the pliable, forgiving nature of our next craft, one that weaves strength from countless fragile strands. The steady tick of the clock gives way to the soft, rhythmic click of the bobbin against the loom. In the dim light of a weaver's workshop, countless colored threads were woven into vast, narrative tapestries that did far more than insulate cold stone walls. They were the blockbuster films of their day, telling epic stories of battles, myths, and faith for an often illiterate populace. Your journey into this world begins with the loom itself, a monumental wooden frame that can be built vertically as a high warp loom or horizontally as a low warp loom. Its skeleton is strung with strong, taut threads of linen or wool, the warp, which forms the very foundation of your work. These vertical lines are the constants, the unchanging structure upon which the story will be built. Before a single colored thread is introduced, the design must be meticulously drawn to scale on a large sheet of paper. This is the cartoon, your detailed roadmap, and it is placed directly behind the warp threads for you to follow. As the weaver, you work from the back of the loom, seeing the cartoon through the forest of warp threads. Your primary tool is the bobbin, a small, shuttle-like device wound with your colored weft thread. You pass this bobbin over and under the warps, following the outlines on the cartoon, slowly filling in a face, a leaf, a patch of sky. After each pass, you reach for a comb-like tool called a beater and press the new weft threads down tightly against the ones below. This packing is what gives tapestry its incredible density and durability, transforming loose threads into a solid, cohesive fabric. The pace is almost unimaginably slow. A master weaver working full days might complete a single square inch of complex design in a day. This forces a profound relationship with the work, a deep immersion in every minute detail of the story being told. To manage sharp transitions between colors, like the red of a cloak against a blue background, weavers used a technique called slit weave, where the two colors simply turn back at their boundary, creating a small, vertical slit in the fabric. For the modern maker, this entire epic process can be scaled down to a simple frame loom that sits on a tabletop. The principles remain identical, warping the frame, following a small design, and learning the rhythm of passing the weft and beating it down. When you finally cut your finished piece from the loom, you hold something miraculous, a vibrant, detailed picture made not with paint, but with thousands of individual threads, each one placed by your own hand. This patient, thread-by-thread construction of a protective, story-rich surface finds a direct and metallic echo in the craft of linking thousands of rings into a flexible, defensive skin. A shirt of chainmail was a fortress fashioned from 40,000 individual rings. This was the ringmaker's world, a realm of fire, wire, and relentless repetition. Your reconstruction begins with a coil of iron wire and a solid steel rod, your mandrel. You clamp one end of the wire and begin the slow, rhythmic turn, winding the wire tightly around the mandrel to create a long, rigid metal spring. This single spring contains the potential for hundreds of identical rings. Then comes the first act of separation. You slide the coil off the mandrel and lay it on a hard surface. With a sharp chisel and a hammer, you carefully cut through one side of the coil, slicing it into individual rings. Each tiny circle of iron is a single word in the story of this armor. The next step is where true strength is forged. For historically accurate mail, you cannot simply bend the rings closed. That method, called butting, creates a weak point easily forced apart by a thrust. The strongest mail uses riveted rings. This means you must first flatten the ends of each ring with a hammer, then use a hand punch to drill a tiny hole through the overlapped metal. Finally, you place an even tinier sliver of iron into that hole and hammer it flat, creating a permanent, solid link. The monotony is the point. Preparing and riveting each ring is a lesson in focus, a single motion repeated until it becomes as natural as breathing. Once you have a pile of rings, the weaving begins. The pattern is called 4-in-1. You hold one ring in your fingers and thread 4 others through it. Then you close that first ring, locking the 4 in place. Each of those 4 rings will, in turn, connect to 4 others. It is a slow, methodical expansion, a metal fabric growing one link at a time. There is no way to rush this. A full shirt or hauberk demands hundreds of hours of this focused, meditative labor. When you finally lift the finished garment, its weight is a shock. This is not the light costume of films, but a heavy, dense blanket of steel. Yet when you put it on, it moves with you, a flexible, metallic second skin that whispers of the persistent hands that built it, ring by interlocked ring. This patient assembly of countless small parts into a protective whole finds its parallel in the quiet, deliberate work of preserving words, of building a different kind of armor against the decay of time. A fortress for words requires a foundation of absolute order. The medieval bookbinder's first task was to create the text block, that core of sewn pages. You begin with your gatherings, the folded sheets of parchment or paper stacked neatly. Then comes the rhythmic, almost hypnotic process of sewing. You punch holes along the fold of each gathering and, using a strong linen thread and a needle, stitch them one by one onto raised leather thongs or cords. These supports run across the spine, providing the fundamental strength that will allow the book to be opened and closed for centuries without the spine cracking. This sewing is the true skeleton of the book, a hidden architecture of thread and resolve. Once the text block is solid, you attach the wooden boards. These are not mere covers, they are the shields. Often made of oak, they were planed to a gentle bevel and then fitted to the text block, connected by the very leather thongs you sewed onto. Now comes the moment of transformation, the livid skin. You take a sheet of dampened leather, often calfskin or goatskin, and carefully drape it over the assembled boards and spine. As it dries, the leather shrinks, tightening like a drum skin over the wooden boards, molding itself perfectly to every contour. This is when the book truly becomes an object, gaining its solid, substantial heft. While the leather is still damp and supple, you bring in the heated brass stamps. These tools, engraved with intricate patterns or letters, are pressed firmly into the leather. They create what is known as blind tooling, impressions that are not gilded or colored, but which leave a deep, permanent, and subtle mark that catches the light and the fingertips. Finally, you add the clasps, perhaps simple hooks of forged brass or ties of braided leather. Their purpose is practical and profound, to keep the book securely closed, protecting its precious pages from warping in humid air. For any modern maker, the perfect entry into this craft is to rebind a worn-out paperback. You carefully remove the old glue, resew its pages with a simple stitch, and create new covers from cardboard and bookcloth. The feeling of that first-hand bound book in your palm is unforgettable. It has a weight, a presence, a soul that a factory-made binding can never replicate. This careful assembly of layers, from pliable thread to rigid wood to supple skin, finds its perfect counterpart in a craft that works in reverse, extracting vibrant, lasting color from the most transient and earthly of sources. The artist's palette was a collection of earth, stone, and transformed metals. To create medieval pigment was to be an alchemist unlocking color from the raw, uncolored world. That famed ultramarine blue, the most precious of all, began as lumps of lapis lazuli, a stone mined in a single region of distant Afghanistan. You start by grinding the stone into a fine, gray-blue powder, but that powder is impure, filled with dull, stony waste. The next step is pure magic. You mix this powder into a warm, pliable paste of wax, resin, and oil. Then you knead this sticky mass in your hands repeatedly while submerged in a bowl of warm water. As you work the paste, the miracle unfolds. The pure, blue ultramarine particles are hydrophobic. They repel the water and cling tenaciously to the oily paste. The worthless gray stone matrix, however, is hydrophilic, and it washes away, clouding the water. You drain the murky water and repeat the process again and again until the water runs clear and the paste in your hands glows with an intense, celestial blue. This is extraction, a patient, tactile purification. Vermilion red offered a more dangerous path. You could create it artificially by combining mercury and sulfur in a sealed flask, applying heat to trigger a dramatic reaction that left behind a brilliant crimson powder. For the modern maker, grinding the natural mineral cinnabar is a far safer route to the same stunning, fiery hue. For green, you turn to corrosion. You suspend a clean copper plate over a pot of vinegar, then seal the entire container. Over days, the acidic fumes work on the metal, coaxing a delicate blue-green crust to bloom on its surface. You carefully scrape off this crust, and you have verdigris. But the raw pigment is just powder. It is the binder that gives it life and purpose. You must choose your medium with intent. For painting on wood panels, you mix your pigment with the yolk of an egg to create tempera, a paint that dries quickly with a luminous, matte finish. To paint directly onto fresh, wet plaster in a fresco, you use only pure pigment mixed with lime water, a fusion that becomes permanent as the wall cures. For illuminating a manuscript, you blend the color with gum arabic, creating a delicate watercolor. To grind your own lapis and mix it with egg yolk is to feel a direct connection to the anonymous hands that painted the ceilings of cathedrals. This intimate knowledge of Earth's hidden colors prepares your hands for a material even more fundamental, the very mud beneath our feet. The rhythmic kick of the wheel is a heartbeat for the clay. This is the 16th craft, the potter's ancient dance with the earth, a process where the first and most critical lesson is not shaping but surrender. You begin with a lump of carefully wedged clay, a process of kneading that drives out any lurking air bubbles that would otherwise explode in the kiln's heat. You slam this lump onto the center of the wheel head, the kick wheel's heavy stone flywheel already set into motion by the steady push of your foot. Now comes the centering. With wet hands, you cup the spinning clay, applying relentless, equal pressure from all sides. The clay wobbles, fights, seems to have a will of its own, until that magical moment it gives up and spins as a single, perfect, symmetrical cone. This is not just a technical step, it is a physical meditation. If the clay is not perfectly centered, every subsequent action will magnify that tiny flaw, and the pot will collapse. Only when the clay spins true can the real magic begin. You press your thumbs down into the very heart of the spinning mass, opening a well. Then, with one hand inside and one outside, you initiate the pull, coaxing the wall of the vessel upward. This is where the pot is truly born. The pressure of your fingers must be exquisitely balanced, a conversation between inside and out, as you feel the wall thin and rise. Too much pressure and the wall collapses, too little and it remains a thick, clumsy form. You are not forcing the clay, you are guiding it, listening to its resistance, working with the momentum of the wheel itself. Once the form is achieved, you slice the pot free from the wheel head with a taut wire. It then enters a crucial phase of drying, known as leather hard. At this stage, the clay is no longer wet and pliable, but firm enough to handle without deforming. It is returned to the wheel, often held in place by bits of clay, to be trimmed. With sharp tools, you pare away excess clay from the base, carving a foot ring that lifts the pot and gives it a finished elegance. This is the final refinement of the form. Then comes the fire. The first firing, the bisque, transforms the fragile dried clay into a permanent, porous state ready to receive glaze. The pot is then dipped or brushed with a liquid suspension of ground minerals, a recipe that will melt in the final firing into a hard, glassy skin. That final firing is the ultimate transformation, the alchemy that turns common earth and stone into a vessel that can hold water for 1,000 years. The entire process, from the first kick of the wheel to the last cooling of the kiln, connects you to the most fundamental act of human creation, turning the very ground beneath our feet into an object of both utility and profound beauty. This mastery of earth and fire to create vessels of containment leads us to a craft that works with those same elements, but to forge not a container, but a tool of immense, enduring strength. The strength of a fired clay pot is a small echo of the monumental endurance found in a single brick. To build a medieval city was to first build a temporary mountain of fire, a clamp kiln that could transform 10,000 lumps of local clay into the very bones of a town. Your journey into this large-scale alchemy begins not with fire but with earth. You and your community dig the clay pit, then prepare the mix, a process called pugging. You add water and sometimes sand or straw, then tread it with your feet, a rhythmic, muddy dance that drives out air pockets and creates a perfectly homogeneous plastic mass. This clay is then pressed by hand into wooden molds, each one scraped level to form a perfect, wet green brick. These raw blocks are then laid out in great fields to air dry for weeks, a slow, patient process where the sun and wind must draw out the moisture without cracking them. Only when they are bone dry and pale can they face the fire. Building the clamp kiln itself is an act of architectural foresight. You begin stacking the dried bricks into a vast, solid block, but you must leave a precise network of channels and fireboxes within the stack, a hidden labyrinth for the flames to travel. Once the stack is complete, you seal the entire structure under a thick blanket of mud and old, broken bricks, creating an earthen oven the size of a small house. The firing is a vigil. You light the fires in the channels, and for over a week, a team of firemen tends to them day and night. There are no thermometers, only the wisdom of the eye. You learn to read the fire's color, from a dull red that is not enough, to a bright orange that is just right, to a searing white that threatens to melt the very bricks themselves. You control the heat by opening or closing air vents in the earthen shell, a constant, delicate negotiation with an immense, sleeping beast of heat. After the last fire dies, you must wait another full week for the kiln to cool enough to even approach it. The moment of dismantling is one of stark revelation. The bricks on the cooler outside may be soft and friable, useful only for garden paths, while those at the fiery heart might be glazed and warped from the intense heat. But the bricks from the perfect middle zone, the ones that rang with a clear, bell-like tone when struck, these were the true building blocks of civilization. This week-long communal effort, a temporary industrial feat, stands in absolute contrast to the quiet, solitary, and deeply personal craft that follows, one that captures not a city's structure, but a single human face. A copper plate, polished to a mirror's perfection, holds a deceptive emptiness. It is a silent, metallic slate awaiting the baron's bite. This sharp steel tool, with its diamond-shaped tip, is not pulled like a pen but pushed forward with the steady pressure of your palm, carving a path through the copper. The sound is a quiet, metallic hiss as the baron plows a tiny, precise furrow, lifting a delicate curl of metal. Your entire world narrows to the line you are creating, its depth and direction dictating the final image, shadow and light. To see your progress, you first darken the plate's surface with the smoke from a candle, a technique called smoking the plate. The soot settles into the freshly cut grooves, making your incised design leap out from the polished background, a ghost image in black and silver. Each line is a deliberate choice. A shallow, fine groove will hold a whisper of ink, printing as a delicate gray line. A deep, wide channel will become a bold, black mark, defining the edge of a cloak or the depth of a shadow. The engraver must think in reverse, not of drawing with ink, but of carving out the light, leaving the raised portions of the plate clean to become the white of the paper. When the last line is carved, the real transformation begins. You warm the plate slightly and rub a stiff, oil-based ink across its entire surface, working it down into every single groove. Then, with the palm of your hand and a piece of stiff tarlatan fabric, you wipe the surface clean. This is the moment of truth. The polished areas are wiped bare, but the ink remains trapped deep within the carved lines. A damp sheet of paper is laid carefully over the plate, and the whole assembly is rolled through a heavy press. The immense pressure forces the soft, damp paper fibers down into the microscopic grooves where they kiss the hidden ink and pull it up. Peeling the paper back is an act of revelation. There is your image, born not from a drawn line, but from the physical impression of the plate, possessing a crisp, sculptural quality you can almost feel with your fingertips. This art of leaving a permanent, indelible mark on a surface, of carving identity and image into a receptive ground, finds its most intimate and controversial parallel in a craft that uses the human body as its canvas. The impulse to leave a permanent mark on the skin connects us to a human story far older than the Middle Ages. While widespread tattooing in medieval Europe remains a subject of scholarly debate, the physical evidence of ancient tools allows us to reconstruct a method that feels both primal and profoundly deliberate. The journey begins not with ink but with the tool itself. You can fashion a hand-tap tool by sharpening a bone sliver or a metal needle, then binding it securely to a wooden handle. This simple instrument becomes an extension of your own rhythm. The ink is equally elemental, a suspension of lamp black, the pure carbon soot from a burned oil lamp, mixed with water or a mild antiseptic like wine. There are no sterile modern comforts here, only the basic components of mark making. The process that follows is a world away from the electric hum of a tattoo machine. You stretch the skin taut, dip the needle points into the dark pigment, and then, with a second stick, you begin to tap. Each tap drives the ink-coated points into the dermis, the living layer beneath the surface. It is a slow, percussive, and undoubtedly painful rhythm, a stark contrast to the rapid vibration of modern needles. The result is not the smooth, saturated gradient of a contemporary tattoo, but a distinctive, hand-wrought look, a pattern built from a multitude of individual punctures that stand as a testament to endurance. For any modern maker drawn to this history, the essential first step is to practice this rhythm on synthetic skin or the thick peel of an orange, learning the pressure and consistency required without ever touching human skin. This reconstruction is less about proving a common medieval practice and more about touching the universal human desire to carry meaning on our bodies, to transform the self into a canvas using the most fundamental tools imaginable. This intimate art of personal adornment finds a more public and metallic expression in the craft of shaping wearable beauty from raw metal. A single brooch could hold an entire universe of fire and patience. Medieval jewelry was far more than adornment. It was a portable display of a goldsmith's most exquisite skills, particularly the arts of filigree and granulation. Your journey to recreate such a piece begins with a simple shape, perhaps a disc or an animal form, sawn carefully from a thin sheet of silver. This blank canvas is your foundation. To adorn it with filigree, you must first confront the draw plate. This is a thick steel plate riddled with a series of consecutively smaller holes. You take a short, thick length of silver wire, file one end to a point, and begin pulling it through the largest hole. Then you pull it through the next smaller one and the next and the next. With each pass, the wire grows longer, thinner, and harder, until you have produced a fine, pliable thread of metal perfect for weaving. This fine wire is then twisted into delicate ropes or curled into intricate spirals and scrolls, all arranged on your base plate. To make them permanent, you use a paste of solder, a special alloy with a lower melting point than the silver itself. A careful, diffuse heat from a blowtorch melts the solder, which flows like liquid glue, fusing the fragile wire patterns to the solid background without distorting them. Granulation is an even more miraculous process. You begin by cutting minute, equal snippets from your fine silver wire. Then you scatter these tiny pieces onto a block of charcoal, which has been carved with small depressions. When you apply a gentle, reducing flame from a blowpipe, a miniature spectacle unfolds. The heat causes the surface tension of the metal to overcome its rigid form, and each irregular snippet shrinks, smooths, and pulls itself into a perfect microscopic sphere. Gathering these tiny silver balls is like harvesting a crop of metallic seeds. You arrange them in geometric or floral patterns on your brooch, using a dab of organic glue, perhaps from fish bones, to hold them in place temporarily. The final firing is the moment of highest risk. You must apply just enough heat to fuse the granule to the base plate at a single point of contact, a process called colloidal hard soldering. Too much heat and the entire piece, base and granules, will melt into a single, tragic silver puddle. Too little, and the granules will simply fall away. Success requires a perfectly controlled, oxygen-free flame that encourages the metals to bond on an almost molecular level. When the piece cools and you polish it with increasingly fine abrasives, the true magic is revealed. The filigree stands in delicate, raised relief, while the granules catch the light as 1,000 tiny, brilliant points. This is jewelry that does not simply reflect light. It plays with it, a testament to the absolute mastery of a material most of us only ever see in its finished, perfect state. Such delicate work with precious metals finds its necessary, rugged counterpart in the crafting of essential tools from the most common of materials. A cattle horn is a dense, coiled sheath of keratin, nature's own polymer. To transform this raw, opaque material into a translucent comb is to work with a substance that has a memory of its own. Your journey begins by cutting off the narrow tip and the wider base of the horn, leaving you with a hollow, conical tube. This piece is then boiled or steamed for a considerable time, sometimes for over an hour. The heat does not melt the horn, but it relaxes the keratin's rigid structure, making it soft, pliable, and almost like a stiff leather. At this moment, you have a brief window to shape its future. To create a flat sheet for a comb, you take the softened horn and press it between two heavy, heated metal plates in a screw press. As it cools under this pressure, it retains its new, flattened form, a dark, semi-translucent sheet ready for the next stage. Now you trace the outline of your comb onto this sheet and carefully cut it out with a saw. The most delicate part comes next, cutting the teeth. Using a fine-toothed saw, you cut each individual tooth, one after another. The spacing must be perfect, the lines absolutely parallel. A single misaligned cut can weaken a tooth or ruin the entire pattern. After sawing, the spaces between the teeth are clogged with rough material. You clean these out with a special file, often called a feather file or a tuner's file, which is thin and delicate enough to slide between the teeth and smooth the inner edges without snapping. The final transformation is one of luster. You begin by rubbing the entire comb with a damp block of pumice stone, a coarse abrasive that removes all the scratches and tool marks. Then you move to an even finer powder called rotten stone, polishing the horn until it feels like silk in your hand and glows with a deep, warm, amber light when held to the sun. To work with horn is to understand a world of absolute resourcefulness, where the byproduct of a meal could become an object of daily beauty and utility for years to come. This same principle of transformation, of turning a raw animal product into a refined material, reaches its pinnacle with the craft that gives words a permanent home. The transformation from a raw animal skin into a pristine writing surface is an alchemy of patience and pressure. To prepare parchment is to engage in a dialogue with a material that was once alive, negotiating with its fibers and its memory. Your journey begins not with a knife but with a bath. The fresh skin, still bearing its hair and fat, is submerged in a vat of lime and water for days, sometimes weeks. This alkaline solution works slowly, loosening the hair follicles and breaking down the fatty tissues without damaging the precious collagen layer beneath. It is a waiting game, a test of your resolve before the physical labor even starts. Once the hair slips free with a gentle pull, you move to the hearse, a large, rectangular wooden frame. You soak the skin again in clear water to neutralize the lime, then stretch it taut, lacing its edges with cords to the frame. This tension is everything. It must be perfectly even, a drumhead of potential, for any slack will create a weak spot that could tear catastrophically. Now the lunellum comes into your hand. This crescent moon of a blade is your primary instrument. You scrape the flesh side first, removing every last trace of membrane and fat with long, controlled strokes. Then you turn your attention to the hair side, scraping away the epidermis and any stubborn follicles. The pressure must be exquisitely calibrated, enough to clean the surface thoroughly, but never so much that you gouge the skin. You are not cutting, you are shaving, peeling away layers of history to reveal the blank page within. As you work, you constantly re-tighten the cords, maintaining that critical tension while the skin dries. This slow desiccation under strain is what transforms the soft, pliable hide into a stiff, resilient sheet. The final act is one of refinement. You take a block of pumice stone and rub the entire surface, a process called pouncing. This abrades the skin, raising a fine, velvety nap that will hold ink perfectly without blotting. For the modern maker, this is one of the most demanding crafts to undertake, a week-long commitment to a single sheet. But the reward is profound. To hold that finished parchment, to feel its unique texture and hear its subtle crackle, is to understand the immense value medieval society placed on the written word. This was not a disposable commodity, but a precious, labor-intensive canvas, and the care taken in its creation demanded an equal reverence for the marks placed upon it. That reverence is channeled through the next essential instrument, the tool that turns the prepared surface into a vessel for thought. The writer's hand is guided by a tool born from feather and blade. A single goose quill, properly dressed, becomes a precision instrument, an extension of thought itself. The journey from raw feather to functioning pen is one of controlled transformation. You begin by selecting a sturdy flight feather, then cure it by plunging the hollow shaft into a bed of hot, dry sand. This gentle heat hardens the keratin and burns away the delicate inner membrane, leaving a strong, resilient tube ready for its most critical alteration. Then the pen knife comes into play. This is not a simple cut, but a sequence of deliberate incisions. You first slice the very tip of the quill off at an angle, creating the fundamental slope of the nib. Then, with a second, more delicate cut, you carve a slit up the center of this new point. This split is the heart of the pen, the channel that will allow ink to flow smoothly to the tip by capillary action. Finally, you shape the sides of the nib, paring them down to a fine, responsive point that can flex with the pressure of your hand, creating the thick and thin lines that give medieval script its distinctive, rhythmic beauty. A poorly cut nib will scratch the page, blot uncontrollably, or simply refuse to hold ink, turning the act of writing into a constant frustration. But a perfectly dressed quill feels like a partner in creation, translating the slightest intention into a clean, black line. That line is drawn with an ink that is itself a kind of alchemy. Iron gall ink is a chemical reaction you brew in a jar. You start by gathering oak galls, those hard, marble-like growths found on oak trees. They are not a fruit, but a fortress built by the tree in response to a wasp laying its egg inside. You crush these galls and soak the fragments in rainwater for several days, drawing out the rich tannic acid. To this brown, astringent tea, you add ferrous sulfate, a green crystalline substance historically known as green vitriol. The moment these two ingredients meet, a pale, grayish liquid forms in your glass. It looks utterly unimpressive, like dirty water, but as you write with it, a miracle occurs upon the page. The iron in the ink reacts with the oxygen in the air, oxidizing and deepening from that feeble gray to a strong, enduring brown-black. The final ingredient is gum arabic, a sap from the acacia tree, which acts as a binder, thickening the ink so it clings to the nib and adheres to the parchment instead of beading up or bleeding. To write with a quill you have cut and ink you have brewed is to complete a profound circuit. You are no longer just a writer, you are a toolmaker, a chemist, and a scribe all at once. The permanence of the mark you make, a black line that can last 1,000 years, speaks to a desire to etch our thoughts into the fabric of time itself, a desire mirrored in the lasting impressions of our next craft. That curved tree, destined for the axe, holds the memory of a house. Before the right angles of box frames defined our buildings, architecture bowed to the shapes of the forest. This is the crock frame, an ancient skeleton for a home built from pairs of massive, bent timbers known as blades. Each blade began as a single, carefully selected tree with a natural curve, often an oak, which was then skillfully split down its length to create two mirrored halves. These two halves formed one complete, a-shaped frame, the fundamental unit of the building. Raising these paired crock blades was a moment of communal theater. It required the coordinated strength of an entire village. using ropes and sheer muscle to pivot the colossal timbers upward from the ground until their tops met high in the air. There, they were locked into place with a horizontal timber called a collar beam, creating an arch of incredible strength. This was not just a frame, it was the rib cage of the building. Once several of these Crock frames were erected in a row, they were connected by long horizontal timbers called purlins and a central ridge beam. This network of wood tied the individual frames into a single, rigid structure, the skeleton upon which the roof would eventually rest. The walls themselves were a different kind of craft altogether. Between the timber posts, a lattice of flexible hazel or willow sticks was woven, a technique known as wattle. Then came the daub, a mixture of local clay, straw for tensile strength, and sometimes animal dung, which acted as a binding agent. This thick, muddy plaster was pressed by hand into the wattle lattice, filling the gaps and creating a solid, well-insulated wall that breathed with the humidity of the air. To build a Crock frame is to engage in a profound conversation with the landscape. You are not forcing nature into a geometric grid, but listening to its forms and using its inherent strength. The resulting longhouse feels less built and more grown, a shelter that emerges organically from the very soil and trees that surround it. This archaic, intuitive approach to structure stands in stark opposition to the final craft in our journey, one that demands absolute mathematical precision and represents the pinnacle of medieval mechanical intellect. A barrel is a paradox of strength and flexibility, a wooden vessel that can hold liquid for a century yet yields to the tap of a hammer. The cooper's workshop was a hub of commerce, for without his barrels there was no way to store wine, transport fish, or age beer. The journey of a cask begins with the careful selection of wood, traditionally oak, which is split along the grain to preserve its natural strength, and then shaped into individual staves. Each stave is not a flat board but a carefully sculpted piece of a sphere, tapered at both ends and gently curved along its length. Shaping them is a test of the eye and hand, as the cooper must plane each piece so that when stood side by side, they naturally lean in to form a perfect circle. They are assembled loosely within a temporary metal hoop, a ring of potential that holds the puzzle pieces in a fragile alliance. Then comes the transformative moment, the raising of the barrel. The assembled staves are heated over a gentle fire, often with a small shaving of wood burning inside the nascent cask itself. The heat makes the wood pliable, its fibers relaxing under the coaxing warmth. As the wood softens, the cooper tightens the hoops with a steady, rhythmic hammering. With each ring of the hammer, the staves are drawn inward and upward, their tops curving toward one another to form the barrel's distinctive bulge. This is the moment of creation where a collection of separate pieces becomes a single, coherent form, a wooden womb. While the wood is still warm and supple, the cooper cuts a groove, the crows, inside each end of the barrel. Into this groove will fit the heading, the circular top and bottom of the cask, which are themselves puzzles of joined wood. The final act is to drive the permanent hoops into place. The hammer blows echoing with the finality of a finished creation. That resonant clang is the sound of civilization itself, the securing of sustenance and trade. This profound understanding of curved wood and structural tension represents a pinnacle of hand-tool mastery, a mastery that was entirely dependent on the final and most fundamental craft of all, the one that forged the very tools that built this world. A hammer is not merely a tool, but the hand's own extension of force. Every craft we have walked through, from the scribe's quill to the cooper's draw knife, was born in the fire of the smithy. To forge the tools themselves is to complete the great circle, to become the source of your own capacity for creation. This final craft begins with a simple bar of steel, a blank potential held in the tongs and thrust into the heart of the forge. You watch the metal's color shift through a spectrum of heat, from deep cherry red to the brilliant, incandescent yellow of a summer sun. The critical moment arrives not with a timer, but with a magnet. When the steel glows at a specific temperature and no longer pulls towards the magnet, its internal structure has changed, becoming what smiths call austenite, ready to be shaped. You lay the glowing bar upon the anvil, the hammer's ring echoing as you draw the metal out, flattening and lengthening it into the rough form of a blade or a chisel head. This is not random beating. Each blow is a deliberate act of compression, guiding the hot metal's flow, pushing the molecules into alignment. For a chisel, you forge the sturdy body and then skillfully hammer the end into a sharp, beveled edge. The rough shape is only the beginning. The true magic, the soul of the tool, lies in its heat treatment. Once the form is forged and cleaned up with files, you return it to the fire, heating it evenly to that critical non-magnetic point once more. Then, in a single, decisive motion, you quench it, plunging the glowing steel into a bath of water or oil. A violent hiss and a cloud of steam mark this transformation. The rapid cooling locks the steel's structure into an incredibly hard, glass-like state called martensite. A file will now skitter across its surface without biting. But this hardness comes at a terrible cost: brittleness. A tool hardened this way would shatter like ceramic under the first real impact, so you must give it back its resilience through the ancient art of tempering. You carefully polish a section of the tool to a bright silver, then apply a gentle, controlled heat, often by resting it on a hot piece of steel. You watch as colors bloom on the polished surface, a rainbow of oxidation. A pale straw color indicates a hard, brittle edge suitable for a razor. A deep blue means the steel has grown too soft for anything but springs. For a sturdy chisel or a knife, you aim for a beautiful, tempered purple or a rich bronze, a color that whispers the perfect balance of hardness and toughness. Once this color runs across the metal, you quench it again, locking in that perfect internal state. The final step is a return to the stone, grinding and honing the edge until it gleams, until it is sharp enough to shave wood or pare leather. To hold a hammer you have forged, to feel its perfect balance in your palm, is an empowerment unlike any other. You have not just replicated an object, you have replicated the very means of production. With these 26 crafts rebuilt, from the astrolabe to the anvil, we stand at the end of one journey and the beginning of another. We have not simply assembled a collection of historical curiosities. We have rebuilt a mindset, a philosophy of making that is fundamentally different from our own. This was a world where the creator and the consumer were often the same person, where the value of an object was inseparable from the knowledge and time invested in its creation. Each craft taught a universal lesson in patience, in listening to materials, in accepting the unforgiving nature of a process where a single moment of distraction could undo weeks of labor. These were not secrets kept by guild masters, but profound truth written in the language of fire, wood, and metal, truths about the satisfaction of self-reliance and the deep, personal connection forged between human hands and the physical world. The legacy of these 26 crafts is not a set of instructions in a book. It is a quiet invitation to pick up a tool, to feel the grain of the wood, to strike the hot metal, and to rediscover a part of ourselves we did not know was missing. Each craft we have rebuilt stands not as an isolated relic, but as a vital thread in a vast, interwoven tapestry of pre-industrial knowledge. The blacksmith's anvil did not ring in solitude. Its purpose was to provide the chisels for the wood carver, the draw knives for the cooper, and the fine gravers for the astrolabe maker. The intense, transformative heat of the potter's kiln shares its fundamental principle with the brickmaker's monumental clamp, both harnessing fire to grant permanence to earth. The brilliant blue in the illuminator's manuscript and the ruby red in the glazier's window were born from a shared, hard-won understanding of metallic oxides and mineral extraction. Viewed in isolation, each craft is a marvel of ingenuity, but seen together, they reveal a complete ecosystem of making. This was a deeply local and sustainable system, rooted in the use of nearby materials and driven by a community where each artisan's work supported and enabled the next. This stands in profound contrast to our globalized, disposable economy, where the origin of materials and the hands that assembled them are often invisible mysteries. As craft historian Tolly Weinberg observes, in relearning these methods, we are not retreating into the past, but retrieving essential human competencies for a viable future. The ultimate value of this journey, then, is not merely in the objects we can now recreate with our own hands. It is in the revival of a holistic mindset, a way of thinking that embraces resourcefulness, cultivates profound patience, and recognizes our fundamental interconnectedness with both the natural world and each other. Our journey through these 26 lost crafts is now complete, a testament to the incredible ingenuity and skill of our medieval ancestors. From the celestial map of the astrolabe to the communal fire of the brick clamp, and from the quiet patience of the scribe to the rhythmic hammer of the armorer, each reconstruction has been more than a set of instructions. It has been a key unlocking not just a technique, but an entire way of seeing and interacting with the world. These crafts teach us that true creation is a profound dialogue with raw materials, a practice of deep mindfulness where you must listen to the whisper of the grain in the wood and the shifting colors in the fire. They connect us to a living chain of human knowledge that stretches back across centuries, a lineage of problem solvers and artists whose hands once faced the same challenges ours do now. This is your invitation to join that lineage. Which of these 26 crafts called out to you most strongly? Perhaps it was the fiery dance of the glassblower or the quiet logic of the clockmaker. I encourage you to pick just one and begin your own journey of reconstruction. Start small with a single pewter spoon or a hand-bound notebook. Share your progress, your struggles, and your triumphs in the comments below. Let us build a community of modern makers dedicated to keeping these ancient arts alive and relevant. If this voyage into the hands of the past has sparked a flame of curiosity in you, please subscribe for more journeys into lost knowledge and the spirit of human creation. Thank you for watching, and may your own hands, guided by the wisdom of the old masters, fill the world with objects of beauty, purpose, and soul.